For the maintenance of a wire coat, just for general maintenance at home, you would need a combination of a slicker brush, a comb. There's a couple of different undercoat tools that you can use, and very simply, the goal would be to make sure that the dog is brushed through, that you've got no knots and tangles, that we can get a comb right through the whole dog, everywhere on its body. You want to make sure that you've got a brush that goes through the dog, working from head to tail. And if you have an excess of undercoat that you need to try and remove or thin out, or there's a lot of, chunky bits of coat, then there's some undercoat rake tools that you can use, and you just simply rake them over the surface of the dog very carefully, and that will take away some of the excess coat and help minimize the shedding around the house. So for the maintenance of a double-coated dog, it's important that they're kept well groomed, and there's only a couple of tools that you'd need. A slicker brush is the most important to every other day go over the dog and to remove any of the loose undercoat that's just waiting to fall. That will help keep the hair around the house to a minimum. And then there's a couple of different shedding tools or undercoat rakes that you can use depending upon the season or how thick that coat might be and what you're trying to do. You remember, you don't want to remove all of or too much undercoat because they need that for protection. But you'll start with a coarse undercoat rake, and then of course make sure that you're going through the dog with a comb. The comb's got to go through with little resistance. That way we know that there's air getting all the way to the dog's skin, which is what keeps them healthy. And you can then get a finer de-shedding tool, and that then will actually grab and pull and remove a little bit more of the undercoat. Again, just not a lot of it, but enough to keep that shedding down so that it's not a big problem when they're changing coat at the change of every season. It's good to be able to help the coat breathe and stay healthy by keeping them well groomed. So for the maintenance of a short-coated breed or smooth-coated breed, it's one of the easiest dogs to maintain. If you want to help with the amount of shedding problems that they have, then some de-shedding tools that have very close together teeth, that if you lightly run those across the dog, will help remove the excess, and that just keeps their shedding problems to a minimum. Other than that, don't bath them too often. You can see there's a little bit of undercoat there on that tool from just a couple of swipes. But again, you don't want to go overboard. It's just a once a week with a de-shedding tool or even a rubber glove, anything that will help with the static. And just the only other thing with these guys is then their toenails need to be maintained. Easiest dog to look after is these short, smooth coats. For the maintenance of a fluff coat, there's only a couple of tools you'll need. A basic brush. You can use either a pin brush or a slicker brush, depending upon the length of coat that you're working on. So generally speaking, the longer the hair, the longer the pins on the brush that you choose. And it's important that you brush away from the dog's skin. So that means making sure that you're brushing from the ends of the hairs all the way down into the body of the dog. So we want to try and separate all those little curls from one another, and making sure that we don't have any clumps, because the one thing with a fluff coat that can happen quite easily is that these little curls, when they're allowed to get wet and then dry naturally, they actually will form ringlets that can become mats or knots in the dog's fur quite easily. So these guys do need to be brushed and combed every other day, if not every day, and making sure that we are brushing right through the dog all the way down to the skin. And then to check that we've done the job correctly, it's using a comb with fairly wide apart teeth and making sure that we can put that comb all the way through into the dog's skin. We don't want the dog to be, any tangles or knots or anything at all. And that way you can maintain a fluff coat or a wool coat and keep it the length that you like easily. So that's how you would look after a fluff coat. So for the maintenance of a drop-coated breed, there's only a few tools that you'll need, and the maintenance will be dependent on the length of the coat on the particular dog. So the longer the coat, the more maintenance required. When you've got one that's had a haircut and its hair is quite short, obviously you wouldn't need to brush and comb it as often. But in most pets, when they're given a style cut, they still will often have long hair on their ears, around their face, and on their tails. So it's important that those areas with long hair are brushed and maintained more regularly, as often as once a day. The most popular tools would be either a pin brush or sometimes a slicker brush. You need to be careful with a slicker brush though that you don't break the coat. So for general maintenance, a pin brush, and basically starting at the ends of the hair and working your way up to the top of the dog and using just a downward motion, trying to make sure that the pins get all the way through to the skin. And then again, we just want to make sure that there's no knots or tangles in the coat, which is when we'll use the comb and be able to pass the comb right down from the top of the dog all the way through to the ends, making sure that we've gotten all the knots out if there were any. So that's all you need to do with a drop-coated dog.
When we're talking about maintenance of our long double coat, there are a range of tools that we can use to keep this coat free of dense undercoat or dead undercoat and air circulating to the skin. First being our slicker brush. So this is particularly good for your longer coated areas. You'll see that along her body or her jacket is quite tight and harsh and close to the body, whereas she's got this longer coat growing on the back here. So your slicker brush is really good at maintaining that longer coat, making sure it's free from tangles. The other tool that works really well with your double coats is your undercoat rake. So this one is very safe to use. You're not going to cut off the coat or break the coat or shorten a coat. It's not a blade, so it makes it one of the safer tools for inexperienced pet owners to use themselves at home. Just lightly running this through. This dog is maintained quite regularly. So you'll see that she doesn't have a lot of undercoat coming out there. The third tool that we can use is our Coat King. So this one strips the undercoat out, but as you can see, it is a sharp blade or a sharp instrument. So overuse can cause thinning out the coat too much, or even cutting the coat. Light pressure through, just pulling it through the dog's coat, and you'll notice that it's just removing this downy, lifeless, colourless undercoat here, and no top coat, which is the stuff that's full of colour and nice rich black in texture. Finally, you're going to use your comb. So gliding your comb through to check that you've got no dense undercoat sitting close to your body.
Maintenance of a combination coated dog is fairly straightforward. We focus mainly on the areas where there is longer hair. So you can use either a pin brush or a slicker brush, whichever you prefer or you've got on hand. And you just want to make sure that all of this longer coat, all of what we call the furnishings, is brushed right through all the way up to the dog's skin. You want to make sure that there's no knots or tangles or bits of garden that tends to get caught and attracted to this type of hair. Otherwise, it is a very smooth, soft and silky textured coat that's easy to maintain with just a general brush through. On the body of the dog, you don't need to do much other than go over it very, very lightly and just lay the hair all down into place. And then you can use a comb and just go over the dog again and making sure that you've got the comb going all the way through. Lay the comb in and smooth it all, making sure, particularly in the areas where there might be friction, so in between the hind legs, up in behind the armpits, up in behind the ears. They tend to get knots quite a lot in here on combination coat dogs, but it's as simple to maintain as running a brush or a comb through them at least once a week.
As part of a routine health inspection on your dog, this should include the dog's toenails and also their ears to check their ear health. This is a regular maintenance thing to be able to ensure your dog's health and well-being. Long toenails can put extra pressure on the dog's foot, so almost like us women wearing high heels. It can cause deformation and also pressure points. So understanding the nail structure or the structure of the dog's toenail is important when you're going to routinely trim the dog's nails. There are some breeds of dogs that will have what we call feet issues and not tolerate their feet being held. This is something that you can get the owner to run their hands over their dog at home, get them used to it, because it is something that's going to have to be done for the dog's entire lifetime. So the nail itself is made up of both the epidermis, which is your bleeding, also known as quick. So when you cut the dog's quick, that is going to be the bleeding part of the nail, and the dermis, the exterior. So when looking for our quick, or how far we can actually cut, what we are looking for, if you've got white toenails, you can actually see where the blood vessel ends. If you've got black toenails, however, this can be a challenge for most pet owners or groomers. So when we're trying to determine on our black toenails, we're going by feel rather than sight. So a black toenail we cannot see. We're going to run our finger underneath the nail, feeling for the hard vein that will run through the center of the toenail. Where that ends, the toenail itself would become hollow. So that's going to give us our cutting point. To also make it the most beneficial for the dog, we've got to make sure our angle is correct. So we don't want to simply trim our nails as they're flat to the floor, because this is not taking the overhanging enough of the nail structure to be able to benefit the dog. So when we're dealing with this style of nail clipper, we're having our cutting blade coming up through the porous part of the nail first. What dogs don't tolerate real well is the jamming or the crunching together of the toenail. So if you're going through the harder exterior, for example, sidewards, this is going to cram the nail together. You want to come up through the softer part of the nail first, and ideally don't hesitate. So getting our angle as close back to 90 degrees as possible, with our cutting blade coming up through the porous part of the nail first, and then cut. If we did have an incident where our nail was bleeding, we had cut the quick too short, there are a variety of ingredients that most pet professionals can get for this using a first aid method. One is our styptic powder. This will seal off minor nail bleeds only. The others is Condy's crystals or silver nitrate stick. So this is just an application onto the toenail for 10 seconds until the blood vessel is cauterized. Most of the time the dog will not even react. The best thing you can do is move past the traumatic experience for the dog. So don't make a song and dance about it. Just move on. This is the best thing that you can do for the dog to not create a traumatic experience for them. Keeping the dog comfortable whilst doing the toenails is also very important.